I'm Glen Arnold. I'm going to spend some time today talking about some of the work we're trying to do with manure in the state of Ohio. When you look at our state, when you look at our conditions, when you look at our livestock numbers that we have, and when you look at the fact that we have to dispose or we have to apply livestock manure to fields, it's just a requirement. We build this stuff up through the winter months or other times of the year, and we have to go someplace with it. So even though it's loaded with nutrients, it's something we have to apply from a livestock perspective versus purchasing nutrients from a co-op or something like that. Over the years, whenever we have summer field days, we try to survey farmers and find out what time of year represents when the majority of the manure from your operation is hauled. And basically, over a period of about 5 years, when I've averaged our numbers, we still hold around half of it is done in the fall, very little in the winter time. And then when you look at that, basically our application windows have always been dictated by the growing crops in the field. If you go further to the east of the state, you'll see more manure actually is applied in that April to June time period before they do plant. If you come out here further to the west, we're probably a little higher right here. There was a survey done just the last couple years where they surveyed livestock producers in the Grand Lake or the Western Lake Erie watershed, and they indicated that a lot more manure was winter applied than what my numbers would indicate up here. But I think what they did is in that survey they caught a lot of the small beef producers, and a lot of them are, you know, almost monthly haul type people. So that accounts, I think, for a lot of the numbers you're going to see come out in the press in years ahead about how much manure we do apply. The other thing I would throw out, just so we're understanding early on, even though the livestock guys catch a lot of grief in our area, this is some nice data, and it's not new. I've talked about this before, but this is from Iowa State. And what Iowa State did is they went to 21 fields with a rainfall simulator, and in those 21 fields, they put 100 pounds of fertilizer as P2O5, 100 pounds of P2O5 as swine manure, which would be about 4,000 gallons per acre. They put 100 pounds of P2O5 as poultry litter, which would be about a ton, maybe a ton and a quarter per acre. They went and put 100 pounds of P2O5 as beef manure. That would be like 5 tons per acre. And then they did none at all. And then they caused it to rain by having a rainfall simulator. And then they captured the runoff that came off of the 21 fields, and then they averaged them. And what do you see? The gray line here is total phosphorus that left the farm field, and the black is the dissolved portion of that, or how much of it was dissolved phosphorus. All this shows is that pound for pound, commercial fertilizer will leave a field at more than twice the rate of phosphorus in liquid swine manure or poultry litter or any of the manure sources we use. Now, most people would celebrate that. You would think the media would be yelling, yes, that's the way we want it to be. But because when ours runs off, we pollute ditches and we have to pump it back out, and it looks bad and it smells bad when we apply, you know, we don't get the anonymity and hide under the cover of darkness that we get with the commercial fertilizer. But just know that the nutrients are less available in our livestock manures immediately. That's the effect you're seeing. The phosphorus will eventually be available to the crop, but it's just not as available as fast as what it is in a commercial fertilizer source. For many years, we've kind of looked at nutrient packages within livestock manure. You can get an analysis of the manure just like you do an analysis of soil. When we do that, if you look at these are from Brookside, and I averaged a few together. But when you get an analysis back, this one here is swine finishing manure. It gives you a total nitrogen, an ammonium portion of the nitrogen, organic manure portion, and then it's got a line here called manure available nitrogen. And what that simply means is that if we put this manure on a field, we think that we will get 40 units per 1,000 gallons of nitrogen out of that liquid swine manure that growing season. And that'd be for a corn crop season, not a wheat growing season. And you've got all your other micronutrients that people pay big money for down through here that traditionally come with livestock manure. If you go over here to the dairy pond side, the numbers are considerably less. I'll show you a couple later on, but essentially maybe, as I've done some more plots this summer, I might jack that up to maybe 10 pounds of available nitrogen in 1,000 gallons. But just know that it's going to be less. And we're going to hit that a little bit. But again, micronutrients galore in all of our manure sources. We've done for a number of years plots with a manure tanker across the state of Ohio. This is just one of the plots that we did in Darke County. We did another 14 or 15 plots last summer. Some of them were swine manure, some of them were beef manure for the first time, some were dairy manure spiked with nitrogen. But again, we've had a couple different tankers. This is a Jamesway tanker, and we also have a Bowser tanker that we use. And we're just simply taking liquid livestock manure, applying it to corn at about the same nitrogen rate as what the commercial fertilizer source they're using, whether it be 28 or anhydrous ammonia or whatever. And the results have been really good. Despite the soil compaction, despite the slowness of the application, the process does work. And every farmer we do this with says, I like this, but wouldn't it be nice if we could do it faster? We've done several years of small plots as well. If you look at this chart, everything from my hand upward are pre-emergent plots. That means the corn's planted on a Monday and I'm in there by Wednesday with my manure source. Everything below are post-emergent plots, which means we wait till the corn gets about the V3 stage of production and then we do our manure application. The treatments for the pre-emergent plots at the top and the post-emergent plots at the bottom are the same. And those treatments are 28% at a rate of 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The next treatment is incorporated swine manure at 5,000 gallons per acre to get 200 units of nitrogen. Then we have surface applied swine manure at 5,000 gallons per acre, giving us 200 units of nitrogen. Then we have incorporated dairy manure at 13,500 gallons per acre, about a half inch. Now, it does not provide all the nitrogen I need. It only provides about 135 pounds. So the remaining 65 pounds is provided by 28% that was knifed in right ahead of the dairy manure application. And then here we go with surface applied dairy manure with that 28 knifed in right ahead of my application. You do the same thing for these post-emergent plots down here and then a zero nitrogen check at the bottom. So let's look at what we've come up with. If you look at a 5-year average, which includes 4 pretty dry growing seasons and 1 good growing season, our 28% pre-emergent plots, again, applied within 3 days of the planting of the corn, we've averaged about 143 bushel per acre. If you come down here to when we held off and put that on at the V3 stage of growth, about 145. So we gained a couple bushel because we waited till the corn was out of the ground and needing to grow. But if you look at the manure plot, if you look at the incorporated swine manure at 158.2 and 163.4, in both instances, pre-emergent and post-emergent, you're somewhere between 16 and 19 bushels better over that 5-year period of time. If you look at surface applied swine manure at 131.6 and 137.5, both of those are substantially below the 28, which means basically when we put that nitrogen on top of the ground, we probably lost a good deal of it. If you looked at the dairy manure that we incorporated, and when I say incorporated, we're using Dietrich shanks. We're placing it about 5 inches below the soil. When you look at the dairy manure, we were at 158.7 and 164.6. Again, both are close to 20 bushel better than the incorporated 28%. I think we probably get something out of putting so much moisture in the ground because, again, we had 4 dry growing seasons. And maybe there's a little bit of a tillage effect from the Dietrich shank going through. Those are 2 possible selling points on that. If you look at the surface applied dairy manure, yields really fell down pretty fast. If you use 28 as our standard at 142.6, this one here is down, 16 bushel or so from that. If you look at 145 roughly as our post-emergent, at 135 we were off substantially. So it looks like on the dairy manure, again, we lost the nitrogen that was in the manure itself, left pretty quickly. Had we dumped that 28 on top of the ground, just like we dumped the dairy manure on top of the ground, maybe it would have been even worse. So just something to keep in mind. When you work with most livestock guys, mostly they're not too fired up about the phosphorus and potash in their manure because they got a lot of that in their fields. The only two things I think we can offer them is better use of the nitrogen and getting the kick out of that liquid that you're putting on. Since you're applying the manure, you're adding a liquid to a growing crop, usually a win-win situation. A couple other things I would point out on this. If you looked at dry growing seasons in particular, or super wet ones, I'll use this 2015 year as a super wet one. Roughly, there was 30 bushel difference between the manure and the 28 in that situation. One of the reasons we think that was that the livestock manure, most of that swine manure is in the ammonium form, and we think it stayed around a little bit better in the soil instead of the commercial fertilizer. Again, the crops can absorb the ammonium nitrogen if they choose to, or they can wait till the bacteria knocks it from the ammonium form to the nitrite form to the nitrate form, and then they can take it up. But whatever reason, this showed up in another plot that we'll talk about later, so I thought I'd emphasize that. Dry years, manure seems to have a little bit of an advantage. Very good growing seasons, manure seems to have a little bit of an advantage as well. So we felt real happy about what we've done with that. This summer we again did swine plots in addition to the other ones we did. Generally there wasn't much to talk about. Manure held its own in most instances. If you look at the slight jump for manure there, a little bit there. On this Knopfsinger plot, we dropped off quite a bit. We might have made some assumptions about our nitrogen level in our swine manure that weren't true on that one. With the High Brink plot, again, pretty close. The Kanapke plot, again, pretty close. So again, despite the compaction caused by the large manure tanker, we seem to hold our own with that. And I think that also explains why we don't get the 10 bushel bump in the on-farm plots with a big tanker that we get on my small plot plots with my small tanker. I think that the soil compaction plays a role there. I really do. We've advocated for years about putting manure on wheat because we always want to look for opportunities, windows to apply manure in the state instead of waiting until corn and soybean comes off in the fall. So this is Jerry Neese. He's done this for a number of years, simply going out, applying liquid swine manure at a rate of about 4,000, 4,500 gallons per acre on wheat about the 1st of April, give or take, maybe 20th of March, and having very good yields as a result. We did this for a number of years on side-by-side manure versus 28, and they were both the same, with manure having a slight edge over several years of doing this. You can also knife that in if you choose to. We had some narrow coulter equipment that we used behind a tanker and still outperformed the urea in those plots. So again, we felt pretty good that this is one little window that we can explore. By the same token, we've had 2 consecutive dry falls. So this is a dairy farmer who had issues getting triticale to grow because he planted it. Emergence was extremely slow simply because November was so warm and dry last summer. So we have a commercial manure applicator that came in, applied dairy manure at about 12,000 gallons per acre, just to provide a moisture source to bump the triticale growth. And when you look at the picture, I know this doesn't do it justice, but staying well back from the edges of the field versus where the manure was applied and the turns were made, it did really thicken and help the triticale with its emergence.
Again, you're putting a manure product on a growing crop in an attempt to capture nitrogen. In this instance, we're also taking advantage of the moisture in the manure in that situation. Again, it was a positive impact, kind of a neat thing to see, a new use, a new window, something everyone keeps in mind. The next one I've got here was an all-glaze producer. And what he did is he planted his wheat, and then he had the commercial applicator come in and apply manure within about 3 or 4 days of the planting of the wheat. And as a result, you can see where the commercial applicator turned on the end here. So the wheat is deeper green, it's capturing nitrogen. We're trying to take advantage of another window. You know, if you think back 10 years ago, would anybody have applied manure to newly planted wheat or newly planted triticale or emerging wheat or emerging triticale? The answer is probably no. But if we're careful and we don't overdo our nitrogen amounts, I think we can have pretty good luck getting those things to grow. This is another window that I saw a lot of work done on last year. Now, even though this is going across the emerged corn with 7,000 gallons per acre of liquid manure and driving catty corner across the field, the point I want to make is that we had quite a few commercial applicators in Northwest Ohio who went across newly planted cornfields this past year. And that worked out really well for them. As long as the field is firm, the hose doesn't drag too much dirt, doesn't gouge too much. We had several producers that added somewhere between 5 and 10 days of application window by going across fields of corn that were newly planted and had really good emergence as a result. Now, there was probably enough moisture in the ground to emerge the corn anyhow, but if you remember last year, it looked like it would never get dry enough to plant, and then it got dry and stayed dry for most of us in Northwest Ohio. A lot of our corn averaged about 140 or 150 bushel. So this worked really well for guys who went in on top newly planted corn. Even though it is surface applied manure, and I'm not a big fan of it, of surface application, at least it's being put on a growing crop at a time of year that we don't traditionally think of putting it out. Now, what we've really pushed for a number of years, and we're on we finished our third growing season with, this is Herod Farms from Darke County. This is kind of where we're wanting to go, we think, trying to incorporate liquid manure on emerged corn. What Herods do is they plant their fields to accommodate the drag hose at a 45-degree angle. They put 10 gallons per acre of 28% nitrogen as their starter, which gives you 30 units of nitrogen. Then they side dress with, for them, about 6,500 gallons of liquid swine manure. And it seems to work very well for them. Here's another photo of them coming back across. What they've done for us each year is they've left us 3 strips of corn where they've come back and put 28 in. Now they're running a VTI unit, 7 shanks, and they just put a shank in every single row. They don't skip a row or anything. They just, once they get established and get running with their auto steer, they just put a shank in every row. And you can see how the hose comes across the corn. And there's that traditional snapping sound of the soybean stubble snapping off. And, you know, it looks pretty bad when you're digging up dirt and you're spreading it across. This field really wasn't as dry as we'd like to have. 2 of the 3 years that we've done plots with Herods, you know, we've had wet springs to work with. But we've still been able to make it work. And I certainly couldn't have been out there with a manure tanker in this situation. When you go to harvest time with it, if you look down at the snout of the combine as we're going across the field, you can see that weed control is really good. The standability of the crop is really good. Yields have been very satisfactory that we worked with. And once again, we're just working through over a period of years different challenges, different scenarios that we run into. If you look at the 3 years that we've done the plots with Harrod Farms, in 2014, our very first year, it rained on the field before we started, and it rained and interrupted us a number of times. And I was bullheaded and said I want to keep going, so roughly we ended up with about 204 bushels per acre on each of those. And we did, because our hose gouged out some corn, we thought, reduce our stand a little bit under our manure scenario there. We came back in 2015 with fairly good planting conditions, or side dress conditions, but 2015 was a real wet year. They got more than 10 inches of rain in the first 30 days on the field, and we think we flushed away a lot of our commercial fertilizer as a result of that. So even though we had equal units of fertilizer on both the manure and the 28, we think we just flushed more of that away. We didn't do stock nitrate tests, but I'm sure that's what happened to us. We came back in 2016 with good yields on the 28, good yields on the swine manure for a 3-year average of about 13 bushel. Now remember, in my small plots, we ran around 16 bushel. And on my tanker plots, we're about even Steven year in and year out. But it looks like if we can get away from the manure tanker, we might go back to those better, a greater discrepancy in yield between the 28 and the livestock manure. We're pretty hopeful on that. Now again, for the Harrods, they plant the field at a 45-degree angle to accommodate the drag hose. And as a result, you get more turns, and you're getting narrower and narrower on your planting and your harvesting. So we do lose some field efficiency. We've done it both ways, and they choose to go this route because when it comes time to drag hose the field, one drag hose guy, he lays that hose out lengthways and then proceeds to do the entire field without assistance, without a second tractor, without help. Can we make straight fields work? Well, we don't know. Traditionally this is the way you would do it. If we could make them work in straight fields, then we could put saddle tanks on our manure applicator, and when we pick up on the end and we turn, we could divert that manure into those saddle tanks and then put it back into the field as we go across, so we could eliminate the turning on the end, where currently we lift our equipment up and we splatter manure. Toward this, I had, this is kind of what we're talking about, these hose humpers. Again, not very common yet in Ohio, but a bunch of us got together at CLM training last week, and when we went to the meeting after the meeting at the city barbecue, we spent a lot of time, this is chain and rope and playing around with what if. So at one point we had a hi-ho in the field with a hose humper to anchor it on one end. But again, at least we got a bunch of commercial manure applicators thinking about this. And a couple of them have come up with some pretty neat ideas since then. Whether we can make them work, we just don't know. But there's never been a financial reason to run a hose straight. But there is now. If we can make it work, we think it has a lot of potential. The question goes back to how tall can you be on the corn, and we'll hit that. The other thing that I really think we need to really look at, and that's this phosphorus issue. As livestock manure people, we've always had to apply manure because the cattle and the hogs and the poultry and whatever, we've been building it up and we have to go someplace with it. This is how the Harrods are looking at their side dress. If you look at their corn crop, and we've got 200 bushel corn, here is their corn crop goal, and we have 60 bushel soybeans. If you look at the phosphorus and potash requirements of the corn and the soybeans, this is how their scenario works out. 200 bushel corn, if each bushel requires 0.37 pounds of P2O5 per bushel of grain, when they harvest 200 bushel, they'll take out 74 pounds of P2O5 from the field. If you look at K2O and the fact that we need 0.27 pounds of K2Os removed from each bushel of grain, we take out 54 pounds of P2O5 with that 200 bushel corn crop. That's the year they side dress the corn. If they come back next year with 60 bushel beans, the beans will require 0.8 pounds of P2O5, which pulls 48 pounds of P2O5 out of the field. And then the beans need 1.4 pounds of K2O per bushel, which pulls 84 pounds of K2O out of that field. So when you add the 2 years of crop removal, you remove 122 pounds of P2O5 and 138 pounds of K2O. Now, how much is that going to change your soil test if you don't add anything back? Well, remember, it takes about 20 pounds of P2O5 to change your soil test, add or subtract from it. So basically, we would have moved that one about 6 parts per million or 6 pounds per acre. And for K2O, it takes about 12 or 14, depending on your soil tests. But again, you would have moved this perhaps, 10 to 12 parts per million or bushels per acre. So when the herds come in and they side dress with their manure, they, based upon their manure tests that they've worked with, thought that they needed about 6,500 gallons per acre. So that's their application rate. So they apply, when they put that manure on, 117 pounds of P2O5, 143 pounds of K2O, and they put, I think, about 180 pounds of nitrogen on at the same time. So again, they took care of the nitrogen needs of the corn crop, they take care of the phosphorus and the potash needs of the corn-soybean rotation. When you look at the net nutrient gain, it's basically zero, because again, you have to have 20 of these to move your soil test one way or the other, and 10 or 12 or 14 of those to move your soil test one way or the other. So it's a zero gain. And that's pretty important, because as legislators continue to get pressure with Lake Erie issues, again, this winter, what's Lake Erie going to do? Well, we got 4 inches of rain in January. We got a pretty good rain at the end of February, and we just started with a good rain again today. Lake Erie might be destined to be a bit greener than we'd like to see it again this summer. When we show legislators that we can take manure and we can make it a zero net gain on a field, then we can make that work pretty well. Now, we've done some work that Eric Ricker is going to talk about, where we added nitrogen this summer to dairy manure to bring the nitrogen level up in the manure. If these were positive and we wanted to reduce them some more, we could always add some 28 to our liquid swine manure, bring up the nitrogen level, and then we could back down on the application rate if we chose to. If our phosphorus was a gain issue that we didn't want to deal with. So there is a lot of potential, but almost a perfect balance for a corn-soybean rotation. And that's what we really want to strive for. We continue to do this flattening of the corn to see at what size the corn can handle the drag hose flattening. So what we do is we flatten corn at stages V1 through V5. And when he goes across that field, he's going to turn around and he's going to come back across the field. And we flatten everything twice, and we do 4 replications. Many of you have seen this before, but this is just one of them at a later corn stage. And again, we're doing this with the idea of finding out what's the breaking point, for lack of a better term. At what stage will the corn tolerate 2 trips across with a full drag hose and yield normally? So he goes across it, he flattens it one way. You can see the hose is a little bit low on moisture. It shouldn't be kinked like that. It should have just been a complete moon circle. But when you look at 3 years of data now, we did this in 2014. There's your population, there's your yield. We did it in 2015. There's your population and your yield. We did it in 2016. There's your population and your yield. If you come across down this left side, this is the stage of the corn. No drag hose at all. Drag hose at V1 going both directions. V2 going both directions. Same with our V3, V4, and V5. If you come across and you just look at the yields, no drag hose, 3-year average was 152.5. If you look at the 4 replications that we did and we flattened at the V1 stage, we basically are statistically about the same. Yeah, I know we gained 3 bushel and everybody gets excited about that, but I don't think we want to go out there and hammer our corn just to see if that comes true. But at the V2, on those replications that we flattened, again, still every bit as good as our 3-year average right there, gained a little more. If you look at our V3 corn, flattening it twice, coming across here, we gained actually a little bit better. When you look at the V4 stage and you come across, you would say to yourself, that's where the break is. See, we ran in the 150s and all of a sudden we dropped here a 142, which is true and false. It's true if you look at the 3 years as a group, but 2 of those 3 years we did not see that break. If you look at the first year, we started at a pretty dry year, 145 into the 150s, still almost 150, and then we really broke between V4 and V5. If you look at 2016 that we just completed, 145, 149, 141, 144, 152. So we really held our own. It was just the fact that in the 2015 year, we really went downhill at the V4 stage. So I asked the agronomy people what they thought the issue was. They said either 2 things. One, the corn might have been physically taller at the V3 stage than normal. That's a possibility. The other possibility, they said, because it rained for the next 2 weeks, stayed overcast and cloudy, it just was the corn maybe didn't recover at the rate you would expect corn to recover. Just doesn't like cloudy, saturated soil conditions. So maybe it just wasn't in the recovery thing that we wanted. And of course, we couldn't get any data from being the field too wet, but we don't think we really need to either. We think that 118 versus the 152 is evidence enough to stay off of the corn at this stage. So the prediction at this point is that corn at the V3 stage is fine to flatten with a commercial drag hose. When you think of that, when we count leaves for our stages of growth, this rounded leaf that's the first leaf out of the ground every spring, that is V1 once it has a collar attached to the plant. The second leaf that came out here, again, is gripping that plant like you would grip a shovel or a flagpole or something. So that is our V2 stage. And then this leaf here, see that collar that's right there? It's gripping the plant. This is V3 stage corn. Even though you can see 5 leaves sticking out, this is our V3 stage corn. This is the same height as what some of Herod's fields have been when they've gone through with their side dress efforts. We think once we get the corn out of the ground, the side dressing works a little bit better because you're less likely to cover it up if you do some dragging. Corn seems to be emerged, seems to be in a mood to recover faster. So just I would throw out that we feel really comfortable that V3 corn, we can still drag hose, be successful if you choose to go that route. As we move manure further, I've said this a number of times, I think we really need to look at frack tanks, transportable tanks that we can place in fields. We can put them out, get them away if we had to put them 5 or 10 or 12 miles from the farm and haul manure in semis to them. I know it's becoming more popular in other states. Ohio is following the same thing on that. Again, you hate to have to haul manure any further than you need to, but I think that it's just a matter of time until the phosphorus restrictions are going to make it hard to apply manure close to our buildings where we've built them up. So again, frack tanks like this, we're picking them up from Pennsylvania, we're picking them up from eastern Ohio. $5,000, $6,000. I've seen them as high as 10 or 12,000. Some guys get the water tanks versus the oil tanks and that type of stuff. But again, these are just temporary storage structures that for the most part, all these guys did was cut some holes in the top for filling and then change the connection here so that their transfer pump from their tractor would hook onto it, and then they drag hose out of that frack tank. So we think that's an opportunity that we'll have to look at more and more in the state of Ohio as time goes on. I always put these Cattlemen pictures up because I do think down the road this will be our long-term main equipment that we'll see someday maybe in the state of Ohio. This is a new system that Cattlemen has developed in the last couple of years. It's basically a half-mile of hard hose on a big reel. You've got a large booster pump right here. You've got it fed by a drag hose. It stays on the end rows of this field and has its own AB line. When they drive this to a field, they follow in the back behind it with a joystick and a golf cart, and that's how they steer this from field to field. At least that's the plan behind it. And the reason they've got this design, they call it a continuous manure applicator. And what they plan to do with this is that manure is being pumped from a tank, or could be from a lagoon, could be anywhere, through the half mile of black hose that's on that reel, and then down through the hose to the stinger, and then they're right now pulling a 12-row airway on it. This is an 8-tine airway on the outside, a 4-tine airway on the inside. And even though this is November, they're just applying manure the same way you could be doing to a cornfield in June. The neat thing is the potential for the corn to be a lot taller than what we're doing with the drag hoses there. You know, the corn could easily be the height of these chairs, or maybe as tall as a table perhaps. They said they were able to pump 1,500 gallons a minute through that hose because it's got an inside diameter of 5.1 inches. When they get down to the far end, all they simply do is turn, and then this hard hose lays in the same spot it went down, and it just gets withdrawn. And the Cattlemen is slaved to the tractor. If the tractor slows down a half mile an hour, the hose slows down a half mile an hour. If the tractor speeds up, the hose speeds up. When it works, it should be a really good system. It didn't always work well that day. You can see the kink they've got in the hose and a few things like that. So it wasn't a perfect day, but it still demoed basically the concept of what they're going to do. They brought that to the North American Manure Expo this summer and showed that off. They'll probably take it up to Wisconsin and show it off at the expo. And they put a wheel in there to hold the weight of this longer stinger, essentially. And then when they get back to that hose reel, when it's working right, when they make that turn, that hose is going to, that reel is going to reposition itself for the next 12 rows or 16 rows or whatever rows you've got programmed into the thing. Now you can see where he just about pulls the hose apart right here. Yeah, I involuntarily took a half step back with the camera. But they got that worked out. And you know, while he's sitting there working through the kinks, he's pumping 1,500 gallons a minute. So those of you who know what happens, you do get a pool out there. But they did get it to work. And then that's really what our goal is to get equipment to function the way we would like it to. The only reason I keep emphasizing I think this could be the future is this would allow you to do manure whatever time of year you choose. If you're going to do fall application, you can use it in the fall. If you want to do it after corn planting, your window is going to be much, much bigger than what our drag hose technology is. It's just very expensive at this time. You're looking at about a $600,000 purchase. So it's not in most people's repertoires at this point. But give it a couple of years to come down in price, give it a couple of years to work out some of the kinks. I think there'd be some real potential for this type of technology. And many of you who've already looked at this are busy dreaming up your own poor man's design in your shop. And I think there's several of you that will probably make something work on your farm, I don't doubt. The other thing I want to be important to drive home today in our commercial, or as we look at this, the guy before just talked about how he loves no-till, if you listen to the presentation, and I do too. I've worked with several farmers who do a lot of no-till, and it's fun to see how well that soil holds our equipment when we're out doing plots. This is the soil stratification study that Purdue has done. And they've had fields in no-till for about 30 years. And all we want to look at is the distribution of the phosphorus in the field, because again, that's one of our big challenges we have in the manure industry is phosphorus. Where they plowed the field every 2 years, the blue line and the light blue line, the dark and the light, basically show that your phosphorus is pretty evenly mixed in the 8 inches of the soil that you have, the top 4 and then the second 4 inches. We do a lot of chisel plowing in Ohio. And through that, if you look at this, it really shows that we've increased the amount of phosphorus in the top 4 inches of our soils as a result of chisel plowing. We're not inverting the soil, we're simply disrupting the soil and we're working it back down. And then when you look at what their no-till fields have done for long periods of time, they've really increased the amount of phosphorus in their upper 4 inches. Now, working with Kevin King and his edge of field studies that he's done over the last few years, it seems like the more phosphorus we have in the very upper surface of the soil, the greater the concentration of phosphorus losses when water runs off a field during a heavy rain event. And I suspect that many of the issues that we're running into in Northwest Ohio has been as farmers have improved their soil tilth, they've improved their soil structure, with shallow applications of, or shallow tillage, and we take the soybeans off in the fall, the fertilizer buggy runs out there, puts its fertilizer down, and then they no-till wheat right into that field. So we leave our fertilizer on top. The reason I jumped onto this topic was, in many of my research plots, we run a Dietrich sweep here, and you can see that we basically are putting our manure somewhere between 5 and 6 inches deep, roughly, as we go across the field with the tanker and stuff. What are the commercial manure applicators looking at? If you look at the catalogs from Dietrich and you look at all the newer equipment that's out there, almost everybody is now running with a wavy coater, then a boot that puts manure on top freshly tilled soil, and then covering wheels to cover that up. Are we going to contribute more in the future as livestock producers to that soil stratification because of the newer equipment designs? Probably we will. I think that this is something that this is lower horsepower than that, faster, less likely. You know, I've plugged these damn tubes once in a while and you're out there mad as can be. Well, you don't have that issue if the tube stays out of the ground. You're not going to plug these guys. So again, we're going this direction as an industry. But I think we're going to contribute to that soil stratification faster than ever before. So, you know, I'm going to be one of those guys who's going to stake his claim early that every 10 years we might want to think about plowing fields that we do a lot of manure work with. So food for thought on that. With that, Sam Custer's going to say a couple things. We're going to try to take our research to another step. We've gotten some grant money. We're building 2 toolbars for the state of Ohio that we're going to try to make available to livestock farmers or commercial manure applicators who want to play with side dressing corn. Now, it's going to be hard to get around and make this work. The first year is probably going to be a little bit rough, but at the current time, we've got a toolbar similar in size to this, not identical, but similar to this, being built by Bombauer. And we've got another one being built by Bazooka. And we think both of those will be available for Ohio use this upcoming year. Sam, you want to talk about, you guys have one in the Darke County area? Okay. I think you better hold this. There you go. Here it is.
Thanks, Glenn. Before I start talking about this, if you would, those of you in the room that know what we've been doing with manure for years in Ohio, we're doing things different. We're really starting to look at doing things different, and I think a lot of that is due to Glen Arnold. So help me thank Glenn for making a change for us. I've had the opportunity to work with Glenn ever since I came into Extension back in 2012. I thought he was going to get me fired in 2013 when we started with the Harrods with a tanker and that first day that I worked with Glenn out there in the field, and we plowed out a lot of corn. If you saw the pictures that he showed earlier with the tanker, anytime we weren't plowing out corn, I was driving. Anytime we plowed out corn, Glenn was driving, right? He's the only pirate manure applicator in the state of Ohio that I know of. So, Glenn, a couple things before I talk about what I'm doing. We're going to put a whole lot of new hog facilities in Northwest Ohio here in the next year or two. On one of these double-wide buildings, how many acres of manure per year are we going to apply out of those if we're applying that nutrient balance levels?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the growth of the hog industry in the state of Ohio. Some talk about maybe as not much as 100 new buildings are going to go up in the state. I talked to a guy the other day in Putnam County who's going to put up a nursery, and the company building the pit has 33 on their books to be dug this year. So if one company has 33, I could easily believe we have 100 scheduled to go up. When you go to pump the manure out of these double-wide buildings, it kind of depends on whether they're wean to finish or they're feeder pig to finish. If they're feeder pig to finish, then we could get 1 million gallons out of one of these double-wide hog buildings in a year. If it's a wean to finish, we might be down there around 600,000 gallons, give or take, the first few years till the water lines start to leak and stuff. So again, each new hog building roughly is going to add 1 day of commercial manure applicator time. And if we think our commercial manure applicators are kind of harried to get from field to field and farmer to farmer and get everybody wrapped up every fall, then it's going to be tough to fit another 100 buildings in next year.
And I've heard Glenn say many times as we plan these new facilities, it's something to think about not putting them all together for a couple of reasons. One's disease, but secondly, if we can spread those buildings out over the acres owned and farmed, we can put one of those buildings in the middle of 150 or 200 acres. We may be able to easily drag line out of those buildings without transportation of manure. So something to think about here in the future as we look at that. So as we've worked with Glenn, a couple of years ago, out of the blue, I got a phone call from the Columbus Foundation, and they said, what do you have an interest in doing in Darke County with agriculture? And I was like, oh, we're doing all kind of research with nutrients, both commercial and manure. And I said, well, what kind of money are we talking? And they said, well, $25,000 to get started. And it's like, okay, I come out of the school industry where if somebody gives you a couple $100, you get real excited about that. So Glenn and I got together and we started dreaming about possibilities, and we talked about this drag line component. So we started pricing that unit, and we were pretty confident that for $50,000 we could put something in place. So thanks to the Columbus Foundation and the Ohio Farm Bureau Water Quality Initiative, we were able to put together money to get one of these put together to base out of Darke County and our surrounding counties there in that area. So our goal this year is to get this unit onto a farm here in the next few weeks as it's finished being built locally here. And we are going to work with, kind of my goal is 10 to 12 producers. This first year, we're asking them to do a couple things. We're going to ask them to have in place manure analysis for their buildings. Like to see soil sample results. There's soil audit reports for the land that they're going to apply. We want them to work with their commercial applicator to know that when we're ready to go, they can hook on and do this. All but one, I'd like to plant diagonally. If we've got a real brave person, we're going to try to work with them to plant in that traditional perpendicular to the road format, because as Glenn talked here, if we don't get that pulled off and everybody wants to go diagonal, that's great. We'll experiment in the fall when we can see how that works, and if it doesn't work, then we can turn around and go diagonal. But that is our goal. We're also going to ask that these 10 or 12 people that we work with that will leave check strips, because that's our whole goal here, is to be able to go out in our communities and share with neighbors that this process works. So we want to be able to show that we have a product here, a nutrient product and not a waste product, that will give them that advantage both economically and environmentally as they move this swine manure into a growing crop versus dumping it in the fall just to get it out of the buildings. So that's our ultimate goal. So if we have check strips so that we can do yield checks and we harvest that and we can share that information is our goal through that process. So what we're looking at, not really interested in emptying buildings with manure or pits, kind of looking at that 30 to 60 acres maybe kind of concept that we can easily get applied in a day, because it's going to be a new concept, and for all but one of our guys, it's the first time pulling that hose over corn, so there's going to be some anxiousness, as it has been for Glenn and I a couple years. We know that there's some conditions that don't work quite as well. Last spring we were into some pretty mellow soil that had been recently tiled and chiseled and worked very well, and it was really, really good soil, and we plowed a lot of dirt. That was the one we saw. We had equal yields, but it did not look pretty that day as we did that. And we moved a lot of soil. So a good firm seed bed, no-till situation is perfect. Planted into a stale seed bed is kind of what we're looking for in that process. So we'll move that throughout Darke County, and then also possibly Mercer. I know Jeff Stockler and I are working on an Auglaize operation. Of course, some concerns are taking a piece of equipment like this and moving it down the road as we move it from one side of the county to the other. So we're working through that, and hopefully we can come up with a trailer that we can trailer that on and work through that process. What am I missing, Glenn?
We'll have a second toolbar also that's being built by Bazooka that I think I'll somewhat be in charge of. Jason Hartshoot over in Crawford County is going to have hopefully a plot or two. And then up in my way, I've got a couple farmers that want to try it. So we should have 2 toolbars. We're actually writing some grants to get some additional toolbars. And if you think some of you are old enough to remember Soil and Water used to loan conservation tillage equipment out many, many moons ago, it served its purpose. It got farmers interested in trying something. So when they upgraded their equipment, they went forward and they bought conservation equipment. Our thought process is that there's enough cousins and brothers and uncles and whatever who own livestock facilities that if it's successful, my thought is in a couple of years they'll say, we cannot wait on your equipment, we're going to go get our own. And that would be our goal, that at the family reunions they talk this over, they make some decisions and then go forward. And again, we're just trying to explore windows of opportunity. If you actually were drug into court and asked what happens to all that nitrogen from all that fall applied manure, well, we lose a lot of it, especially on a winter like this. So if we can show legislators, lawmakers what we're doing, if we can show an economic return for you by not having to buy side dress nitrogen, we think it's a win-win situation there.
We also know, I know personally, back in 81 when I moved into Darke County, almost every farming operation north of 36 had hogs or livestock of some format. Since then, that's changed a lot, and we have generations that haven't been in the hog business. So when someone goes out and does that fall application of swine manure or dairy manure on bare soil, all the neighbors get excited. They don't like the look and they don't like the smell. I can tell you when we go in and do a side dress in standing corn, we can do that across from the road from some of those people that have had the biggest concerns in the past, and they're excited about kind of work we're doing, and as we get it covered up, it doesn't smell, it doesn't look bad. It's pretty encouraging through that process. So I think this will help us out with the neighbors also as we work through that and apply it in that growing crop.